Welcome, everyone, to this Good Leadership Podcast. My name is Charles Good, your host and the president of the Institute for Management Studies. This podcast is designed to provide you with actionable insights and tools that you can use from discussing the research, stories, and background from recognized experts and practitioners to accelerate your impact in your current role. I'm very happy to be joined today by Juliet Funt, best-selling author of A Minute to Think, that explains how to reclaim your creativity, conquer busyness, and do great work. She's also a speaker and consultant and has advised companies such as Spotify, National Geographic, Vans, Costco, Nike, Sephora, and ESPN, to name but a few. In this episode, we're going to talk about the power of WhiteSpace to improve your life. WhiteSpace is that precious time in your day when nothing is scheduled and there is WhiteSpace on your calendar. Thank you for joining me in the program today, Juliet.
Thank you. And right in with the definition of white space. I don't even have to do it. Thank you very much.
Great. I'd like to always start this episode to just give a little bit of background on what really got you interested in this topic.
I think you write the book that you need to read. We've heard that in every possible leader. I am a go energizer bunny of an executive lady who, if left to my own devices, would probably sleep very, very little. And when you're constantly noticing your own inclination to constant motion and activity, all you crave is space. And it's harder than it sounds to make. So I spent about 20 years learning how to get it and then have been sharing that with others for a very long time. I also spent those 20 years in my day job watching through consulting and training how much what we call tolerated misery is a part of work. And we feel that there has to be some salvation for these exhausted folks, especially when some of the problems are so simple. We just need to find elegant ways to get them started on being solved.
Well said. And that's easier said than done. And you list in your book 3 main factors that have really placed us on this moving walkway that's eliminating white space from our lives. Love for you to unpack those 3. And I love in the book too how you say each one has a certain factor, right, that you can associate with it.
Yes, we should probably talk about what the it is that they lead to first, which is the age of overload was present before COVID, but now 3 years in with 11 hours a day of Zoom calls and exhausted people now turning a corner to pre-recession budget cuts and panic, there just is never a moment where the soul of the American worker can be the most important thing. And this is my passion. My passion for the humanistic side of this then lives underneath a much more corporate angle, which is when you make things more productive and when you save money and when you reallocate talent time, it's wonderful that the same solutions there solve the human problem as well. We just need work to be less onerous. And when it is less onerous, it becomes more creative and profitable, and it's also a whole lot more fun. And so that's when we talk about the 3 factors that lead to busyness and overwork and overload. That is the state of affairs that I'm talking about. Real human beings going to work every day have to soldier up for an enormous amount of discomfort that stands in the way of letting their talents soar. And that's too bad for them, and it's too bad for their employers.
I agree with you. Do you think now that's gotten worse since the pandemic or gotten better since we're now able to work from anywhere and have a little more flexibility in where we're spending our time?
It's both. The flexibility element has improved for sure, and everybody likes that. But the seamlessness of the way work and life get shuffled together like a deck of cards has gotten much, much worse. And we're toggling and switching all day long back and forth between home life and personal life when we're home. I mean, there's so many problems with the state of affairs right now. John Cotter, the change expert, talks about change coupons, and he talks about when you've used up your allocation of flexibility, you reach a wall. I think we reached that wall quite a long time ago and are still being asked to change. Now we're going to do hybrid, where we wake up on Tuesday and say, is it pants or pajamas? What day is it? It's a lot. It's a lot for people.
You're right. And I've seen it with my own personal situation. Those boundaries are getting blurred as far as when you're working versus when you're not working. And it seems like busyness is getting worse and worse, and you're trying to cram more and more stuff into your day. And one of the questions that you state in your book is the wrong question to ask yourself at the end of the day, at the end of the week is, did I do enough, right?
Yes, that's the additive question, that question that has to do with the first 3 factors that you wanted me to highlight. Insatiability. The three together are insatiability, conformity, and waste. These are the three things that weigh down human beings at work, and we can go through all three of them. But insatiability is always whispering in your ear things that have to do with quantity. Did you get enough done? How many boxes did you check? How many hours did you work? Insatiability really has no ability to determine high value versus low value work. It's just looking at the size of the pile. And it has infected a lot of the way that workers think about their value. And it's infected a lot of the ways that bosses think about the value of the worker. That's why we have these nanny cam situations or keeping the camera on all the time where people are afraid that there is a stepping away. A beautiful contrast to that we write about in the book is called ROW. I don't know if you remember the term, results only work environment. That's the absolute opposite of a quantity-based value system where you say to yourself as a leader or as an executive team, what are the results that we care about? And are people delivering on those results? Not where they work or how they work or FaceTime. And the tricky thing about ROW is that if you take it in its face value, a remote worker could use it to stay home forever. Because if they look at just the results of productivity, that's a thin version of ROW. But if you look at results that include, are our results building a community? Have we built a culture? Are we close to each other? If those layers count in the things that you care about in your results, then ROW really becomes the perfect template to find a balance between the folks that want to stay home and the folks that want to come to work.
I agree with you completely on that with the insatiability dimension. The conformity dimension reinforces those problematic beliefs and habits. Positive conformity can change this paradigm, but it's difficult, correct?
It's really, really difficult. And when you're not having leadership model anything from above you, it becomes even more difficult to put your toe in the water of a sane choice. We talked a little bit earlier about my dad from the Candid Camera television show, who was Juliet Funt. And he did a very, very famous sketch called The Elevator, where,
I know it. Yep.
You know the elevator bit? Maybe we can put it on the resource page if we think of it. Jamie will send it to you. But folks walk in an elevator. They don't know they're surrounded by actors from the Candid Camera. And this is way before, what you have to understand is this is before the day where you could ever walk in and out of an elevator and it wasn't the same door. Because now sometimes there's a door behind or to the side. It was only one door, only one way in and out. But while they were in the elevator, the actors would turn to the left randomly, and they would turn to the right randomly. They would take off their hats and put on their hats. And what they found was that people will follow and follow and follow, and they will mimic the behavior that feels normative around them. And this is what we do at work. Everybody else checks email one last time at 11 p.m. and we do too. And everybody else thinks that they should cut their vacation short or stay connected during it, and we do too. And that's the pernicious conformity that really takes us down into the world of busyness, because we're mimicking each other into a state of complete surrender. There is a concept that we teach called the empathy gap. It can sound insulting, so you have to just bear with me for a moment if you happen to be an executive leader listening. But the idea is that there is a gap of the visceral understanding between senior executives and the real workers of what does it feel like to work here? And that's not their fault, because there's also a reverse empathy gap. The workers don't understand the pressures of the quarterly shareholder call or what it's like to make a giant payroll. And neither team, if you will, is really completely empathetic. So when we're in an organization, we're usually in with them for about a quarter, making the changes in the work that we teach. We're really, really working on having senior executives do that old-fashioned manage by walking around and talking to people, asking that question that I just asked you, what does it feel like to work here? And if you can make the pain get a little closer, a little more visible and believable to senior leadership who determine resources and priorities, then sometimes you can begin to chip away at it.
That's so important to ask that question. And you have another question that frontline workers can use to help them close that empathy gap with the senior leaders, correct?
We tell them, it's more of an instruction, find a way to connect the misery to the money. And that sounds a little harsh unless I unpack it, but a business's job is to make money. The senior leaders who want to make money are not the evil character in the play. They're doing the job of business. but they don't see the connection that when Emmanuel is incredibly stressed, that he's going to leave and it's going to cost me $140,000 in recruiting and retraining and downtime to replace him. They don't necessarily see that when Donna is completely burnt, she's not going to offer the game-changing idea that will beat your competitor and you'll lose a piece of market share. So you do need to help leaders connect human misery with the data and KPIs and money that they care about. And when that starts to tighten that empathy gap, then we can get everybody a little bit more on the same page.
Well, and the gap too is perceived differently based on where you're at in the organization, where the senior leaders thinks it's just a small gap. HR leaders realize it's probably going to be a larger gap than that, but the frontline leaders or the frontline workers, it could be a chasm that they're trying to cross, right? So that perception is important to note as well, that not everyone feels it's the same gap.
We're seeing, I think I quoted in an event this morning, 61% of people currently considering leaving their job and 70% of the younger generations currently considering leaving their job. So there's going to be an increasingly rude wake-up call for leaders who are unwilling to consider their own gap. It's important as a leader, everyone has gaps in what they understand. And it's not an accusation that calls you out. It's just an opportunity to, you can take that concept and you can put it through one of two channels. You can either say, how does this make me feel? And the answer might be pissed off. But you could also say, how would this help my business? If I was teachable enough, if I could develop the curiosity and neutrality to just say, I wonder if I too have an empathy gap. And there are numerous ways to close it.
So that really talks to the social conformity piece that really eliminates that white space. The other big challenge is complacency around that low value tasks and wasteful work, which are extremely expensive in terms of your time and energy, but most people can't differentiate between the low value and the high value worker. They're just so busy, they just try to do it all.
Yes, and this is one of the places where I think we've differentiated ourselves as a company globally. We created a quantification process that takes simple salary data, attaches it to self-reporting wasteful work, and then just shows, what is this costing you? It's math that your 8-year-old could do, but it's just something that nobody ever did exactly this way before. And so what we do to outline for you how the process goes, when we enter a client engagement, again, usually lasts a quarter, we do a beginning and an end, compare and contrast pre-post survey. And what we're looking for is, we ask people the self-reporting questions of what percentage of your meeting calendar feels wasteful, defined as not contributing or benefiting, what percentage of IAMs, what percentage of reporting feels like it's tactically beyond the depth that's relevant for business, et cetera, et cetera. We get the waste, we cut it in half. This is part of the flow of the math because people like to complain to outsiders. So you just want to make sure you're not over-indexing on their complaints. And then we quantify it using the value of an hour according to their salary and benefits. And the upshot is that usually the number is $1 million of annual waste for every 50 people in an organization. And if you want to connect the misery to the money, just put a little coaster with the million for 50 number under the coffee when you slide it on the desk and start singing that song, because it's true and it can relate to both sides of the equation. The waste makes people hate work and the waste costs leaders a lot of money.
Oh, and that's so powerful to have that connection, right? And have that figure for those that, it really makes that impact even stronger of the waste that's happening in today's society and with today's corporate America. So taking strategic pauses in between the beats of life allows us to access our white space and creates time for thinking, reflection, rest, and creativity. What are some of the benefits with these strategic pauses? You list some of those in your book.
Yes. So you have listeners, I'm guessing some of which will be in an age where you remember when thinking was actually a valid business tool, where you would walk by a boss's office, they had their feet up on the desk and you snuck away because that was the golden hour where they were cooking up the future. And that was a big, bold, beautiful thing. And now we only execute. We only execute. And so this is the tonal difference in the way that the pace and feeling of work has shifted. But if you look at the people that you admire, if you look at Phil Knight from Nike, who had a dedicated chair in his living room only for daydreaming. If you look at Bill Gates, who went off for his 2 Think Weeks every year, you'll see that the people that you admire know that thoughtfulness is a business tool. So in the book, we go through 4 ways that you can use what we call a strategic pause. You can use it to reflect, to recuperate, to construct, and to reduce. And if you like, we can break those down a little bit and kind of open them up.
Well, I'd love to just maybe talk a little bit more about one, because you're right, we're in a complete execute mode all the time. We don't allow enough pauses in our life to what I think is really important for most leaders is to reflect.
Yes, you can look at what kind of leader would you like to work for? One who has no space in between, I have a thought and I'm going to ask you to execute on that thought, versus I have a thought, let me park it. Let me mull it over. Let it sit inside of me for a few days before I allocate your time and resources to that thought. And that's the kind of reflection that is so valuable, not only at the senior level. I'll tell you actually a reflection exercise that we just came back from doing 2 days ago in our own team, and some others out there may want to try it. We're recording this early in the year. It's a beautiful exercise for any new quarter or any new year. We went away as a team. And we love sticky notes, colored sticky notes. So we took a whole wall and we covered the wall with the pink sticky notes, which represented our priorities for the year. Blue sticky notes are projects for the year, and green sticky notes are to-dos, and they go in that hierarchical order. Now, many people do this kind of planning, but they don't do something that we do, which is they don't look first for waste before they build. And so when we sit as a team and we stare at the pink sticky notes, we stared at them for a long time and said, which of these can we let go of? Which of these can we demote? Which won't really make the cut for 23 and maybe should be 24? So that by the time we then cascaded a planning meeting, which continued for the rest of the day into projects and to-dos, we were lean on the things that we chose to call priorities. And then we went to the blue level and became lean on which projects made it through the gauntlet of true importance, and equally with the green. So by the time we were staring at the end of the day of a big board that showed what we would be spending every single minute of our year on, it was skinny. It was beautifully simplified to the point where we're all very excited to dive in and we don't feel overloaded because there wasn't a lot left on the board. The most important things were left on the board. And without that permission to think and reflect, and in our case, also be what we call reductive or stripping away, you can't really approach a year or a quarter or a project thoughtfully.
So important. That reductive mindset is so critical. I love in the book the analogy you give between tuna and krill, and how a lot of people want to move and go for the tuna, but it's better to start with reducing the krill.
Yes, let's define reductive mindset, because we didn't do that yet. The corporate world is additive. It will always and forever want to add more stuff to your plate. Therefore, you need to learn to be reductive. That word has other meanings, but here we're talking about mathematically to remove, 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 remove. And we all need a filter for the rest of our professional careers that's just constantly removing, cutting in scope, shifting, delaying, vendoring out, whatever we need to do to shrink the plate. And that's what we did in that retreat exercise that I told you about. When you're looking for a target of reduction, you can have 2 choices, tuna or krill. A tuna is a big, ginormous fish, and krill is a little teeny, teeny, beany crustacean. And you can find waste in both areas. Tuna is, I want to cancel an offsite. We're going to drop an international market. We're going to let go of one product. That's big tuna sacrifices. Krill is, what if we all learned to write with more brevity and each email was 12 words less? And what if we decided that all of these parts of the slide deck actually belong in the appendix and they don't really need a spotlight and to seem so important? So you can gain extra time back either through tuna or krill, and you can go back and forth and do both.
Love that analogy, and I agree with you. It's always easier to take out the little areas of time that you can have and hopefully convert into white space than it is to try to find those big projects that you can eliminate right away. Many people think, though, that when you have a strategic pause, you need to allocate large blocks of time. I love what you state about it. It can be like a wedge, just a small portion of white space inserted between two activities. So you don't think you have to right away allocate huge portions of time for this. You want to hopefully expand that time as you move forward in this reductionist mindset. But a wedge just stops us in the moment of life before taking the next action so that we're more deliberate, correct?
Yes, yes. And you can have a wedge that opens and separates between an idea and a response, between a meeting and a meeting. It can be a minute, 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 3 minutes. Most people enormously undervalue the what we call oxygenation that can be provided from small interstitial sips of space. And yes, you can sometimes take executive length white space and take a legal pad and sit out on the porch for 30 to 45 minutes, but that's not going to happen that frequently. What's going to need to be happening all the time is that interstitial use. In an ideal scenario, you're saving up for the big and you're constantly using the little.
Right. That tuna and krill analogy works well in that case. And that really,
Yeah, it does actually. Tuna, white space, and krill.
there you go. And that eliminates any excuse that you have. I just don't have time to do this. It can fit in any day that you have, even in the small interstitial spaces that you've allocated between activities or when you're driving to and from work. So keep that in mind, everyone that's listening.
Can I just say a PS of what you just said of people who are listening? The barrier to white space is guilt. I feel guilty when I stop. I feel guilty when I set a boundary. I feel guilty when I close my eyes to breathe for 2 minutes. So the mantra that you have to practice if you feel guilty is, it's better for the business. When you are refreshed and clear and focused and vital, it's better for the business. And I just wanted to put a nod into that guilt because it is everywhere, at every level, in every role, stopping us from taking even a moment's pause.
You're right. And thank you for stopping me with that, because I see the value in it, but many people don't. They are in an execute only mode, like you mentioned. And to stop and pause, it feels like, yeah, they are guilty that I should be doing something else right now. Why am I being selfish and just pausing when I could have 2 or 3 emails answered, right?
Right, right. How victorious. I could go to my grave with 2 or 3 more emails answered.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. Well, let's do the thieves because I know you want to talk about the thieves. They are such important content.
So we're going to go through each one individually, and we're going to talk about the truth of it, the con of what it's stating that it's going to give you, but really it's not. And then if that thief of time is really an issue for you, what is a simplifying question that you can ask yourself to get you out of that so that you don't go too far down that path without course correcting? So we're going to start with the first thief of drive. The con is we should take on as much as we can handle. Why is that wrong, Juliet?
Well, all of the thieves, we should give the background of where the thieves come from. They come out of research. When we tried to figure out why people were so busy, we found 28 unique factors that drove people to busyness and boiled them down to these 4 assets. And I say assets because that's the irony of them, is all 4 of the thieves of time are actually simply good things that have run amok. And to get them in a list before we start breaking them down, they are drive, excellence, information, and activity. So drive, as you said, wants you, and they're very personality based. Some of us will be drive people and some of us will be excellence people. That's me. Drive looks also at the quantity filter. It's very insatiable and it wants you to take on more and more and never let go of anything. But the results of an acquisitional stance like that are going to be thin for each project. You'll burn people out, you'll stretch your resources too thin, and you'll probably be moving too quickly to make great decisions. So those are some of the risks. We would say the technical risk of drive is overdrive. And when you get in that mode, you often are in a lot of denial. And we like to gently say to people, let's ask your adrenal glands if this is working for you, especially a very type A driven, sometimes male, sometimes executive. There are certain personality types that just get lost in drive. And what they don't realize is that selectivity actually leads to better and richer results in each of the smaller list of selected options.
That's so important. And having that question, is there anything I can let go of? Having that reductionist mindset to reduce the amount that you're trying to do. Because you're right, and I just wanted to backpedal, you're right that all of these are positive qualities, but when taken to the extreme, they can become corrupted.
Yes.
So it's nothing that's a necessarily evil or bad thing, but you just have to have it in moderate levels.
Oh, it's beautiful, in fact. And so you've brought up now what we'll call the simplification questions, which are a set of questions that correlate. And you stated the one for drive. Is there anything I can let go of? Or if used in a team or organizational setting, is there anything that we can let go of? That's really what we did in that exercise I told you about, where we stared at the 12 pink sticky priorities and said, I think that 7 would work better. We asked ourselves over and over, where could we let go? And what happens is that everything that's left behind gets to be now in a spotlight.
You're right. The next one is excellence. And the con there, what you find yourself believing is that every touch point deserves to be optimized.
Yes. And this is where I fall down. Some of my perfectionistic brethren. If you think of it, though, differently, if you think of it like you have a little gold sack, like a Renaissance suede sack full of gold coins, that's your excellence. And you only have a certain amount of them to spend over the course of a day, a week, a month, or a quarter. If you just spend them on everything, you're absolutely going to run out of the drive and energy to do it right. But if you think each time, does this deserve one? Does this not? Does this deserve one? Does this not? You'll be more judicious. And the question to ask is, where is good enough good enough? Where doesn't it really matter? I'm writing an internal agenda for 3 people I work with every day. Why does it have to be pretty? Why does the font have to be correct? These are the questions that perfectionists have to ask themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. The next one is my weak spot. It's information. And I always feel like there's no such thing as having too much knowledge.
Yes, I think that information people tend to go that way. The question for information is, what do we truly need to know? And I'll give you one of my favorite stories about the thief of information. There was a gentleman who worked for GE, and his name is Brendan, and he's really super duper smart. And they used to send him and about 6 people to these hotels. It was kind of a forced think tank, where they would just go and put these brainiacs in a room and feed them day after day after day more data and more information, and ask them to crack problems and solve things with all of this data. And he told me that Thursday was always the day where there were breakthroughs, or they figured something out, or more importantly, where they caught themselves going in the wrong direction in some of their analysis. And so, of course, I said, Brendan, why is Thursday the magic day? And he said, because Wednesday is the day that we did the laundry. And so Wednesday, we had to step away. We had to have some space from all of that data, and we had to really look at what was popping up in our brain as the really most important stuff. So we're used to binging. If we're an information person, we're binging. We're not giving the mind any oxygenation, not giving the gray matter anywhere to play with all that great space. So what do I truly need to know means I'm a leader who just asked for a piece of report or data or a scoreboard. Am I just curious? Or is there actually a tactical reason? Do I not trust my downline? Why am I jumping over them and asking for data that they should be analyzing? What do I truly need to know?
Thank you. And the final thief of time is the most common one, and that's activity. And the lie that it's trying to tell you is that being busy and being productive are the same thing.
Yes, and we know that they're not. There's another reason, though, for activity now growing and growing. It's this free-floating anxiety and loneliness that we've all been dealing with. We can pretend that we soldier up and we're okay, but there's still ambiguity, and still we're waiting for announcements on the economy and where is business going to go. And this undercurrent of ambiguity, I believe, makes us a little spastic, and the spastic feeling just keeps jumping for, it could be, I reach for chocolate, I reach for Netflix, I reach for a cigarette if you still do that. It could be, I reach for email, I reach for IM, I reach for the next project. And they're really all very, very similar, soothing ourselves through this hyperactivity. And that's not the only reason that activity people get lost, but I think topically it's a pretty hot one.
Wonderful. Thank you for unpacking those for us. And that really helps our listeners to say, for any situation where stress raises its head and your resources seem threatened, take a pause, look for a thief, and ask a simplifying question to get yourself out of that cycle.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Before we close today, I just want to cover one additional topic if we have time, and that's the power distance. And I know it's something that your father kind of looked at closing in his shows, and this is a phenomenon that can cause people to avoid or defer to those they feel are more powerful. And in doing so, you shut down channels of honest communication. So how can we close that power distance?
I would say avoid. I think you're reading words that I wrote, but I would say avoid, defer, and lie. They just plain lie. That's what really ends up happening. For those of you who are listening that don't know who we're talking about when we're referencing Alan Funt from the Candid Camera, Alan Funt my dad started the very first ever reality television show way back when it was kind and sweet. And that's who we're referring to. He had a habit when he interviewed children for the show that is one of my favorite stories. He knew that he'd walk into a school. He knew he'd be this giant, tall adult, and a little second grader would come out, and he knew that there would be a power distance. So what he would do is light a match, and then as the child entered, he would feign blowing it out, and he'd huff and puff with great theatrical pff, 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 pff. And then he would turn to the youngster and say, "Could you blow this out for me?" And by asking for help, he flipped that power distance for just a moment, just enough to create connection and softness, and then off they were into this beautiful, intimate conversation. It's not a good idea for senior leaders to pretend that they need help, but asking for help when it's authentic works. Making a vulnerable admission of something that they're confused about, or that they don't know, or that they think that they've done wrong, that works. Or finding any other way to be human. Sometimes when we're on Zoom and we're listening to the CFO and they're a really scary person who's scared us for 4 years and their cat walks across the keyboard, that does more for the connectivity of that team than 100 hours of meeting together, because we just want to be with safe, humanized leaders that we feel like we can talk to.
Well, that's a great piece of advice to end this episode on, to build that sense of connection between all leaders in the organization. Thank you so much, Juliet, for joining me today. Remind our listeners how they can get in contact with you.
We'd love to meet them and hear from them. Juliet at julietfunt.com is my email, simple as, and the website is julietfunt.com.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Good Leadership Podcast.
Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed this episode, I encourage you to share with others and post about it on social media. You can also go to our YouTube channel, which has video recordings of all the episodes of this podcast, along with bite-sized segments called single servings that are designed to answer your most pressing leadership and management questions. Remember, until next time, it's not what you know that counts, but what you do consistently that makes a difference.